This is a very important session, according to me. We just had a roundtable up, which was coordinated by Pramod and others, which was definitely interesting and a lot to be done. But so I'll just introduce myself so you get the context very quickly. I'm from CCAM, Center for Cellular Molecular Platforms. It's a Government of India initiative based out of Bangalore, North Bangalore, being an enabler or catalyst of deep science innovations through life sciences. So it could be healthcare, agri, and even environment. And we have around 150 of our own innovations which are out there across India. And our philosophy is just to keep identifying deep science risky ideas and see if they will work forward. Now, that is one. So while we were doing it, and when you talk about life sciences, largely you talk about, cellular biology, pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical, like or biopharma, your medical, there's a lot. Then what is that we are doing it? We realize when you actually connect with the ground, there's something that is missing. People say that there is 20 to 30% of Indian population, and we are 1.3 billion or more, is underserved or not served in terms of healthcare delivery, right? And that's a significantly gigantic number. Let's take 30% of 1.4 or 1.3 billion. You are actually talking about nearly, possibly 0.5, nearly, or possibly a bit less, 0.4. That's 400 million people. That's a very high number. And as one goes down to this, there are several reasons that it is such a big population is kind of underserved. And when such a big population is, one of the larger things they have said is that there are resources in terms of human resource, a skilled resource, infrastructure, and other aspects which are kind of, not being met up. But as we actually, somebody who is involved in enabling technology, somehow we have started, for the last 4 or 5 years, we are realizing there's a phenomenal opportunity in terms using tech in healthcare to actually address some of these problems. And we are realizing more, it's one of the most exciting things, where the way we have jumped the generations in terms of mobile technology, would a digital generation, if we do it, can we be the leader because we are hungry for solutions which can address the gaps in healthcare? Can we be the leaders because of that? I do feel it's humongous opportunity for us in front of us if we talk about the problems which can be solved by tech, in terms of the numbers which can allow us to understand the trends and put in there, and in terms of the technical capabilities that we all have in terms of Bangalore, Hyderabad, and other places. So I think the recipe, by one, everything is there. The only thing is to make sure that we do it well and not just be happy from far saying, I have everything, I'll do well. So that is nurturing. Right? When you have a potential, you have to nurture it to make sure that the potential becomes the reality. And that is a long thing that we should discuss. And I have phenomenal panelists with me who each of them are going to pick 1 or 2 points that they think they're excited about health tech and the innovation ecosystem. Who will drive that. I think as I said, I'll not take more time. So let me start with Ravi, who's next to me, and I've known for many years, Ravi. So let me start with Ravi and see if you have some thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Taslim. Thank you very much for joining us after lunch.
Yes.
I'm sure you will enjoy this panel with the insights that we can provide you. But I just wanted to give you a slightly different perspective. When I look at innovation ecosystem, this is where we are not only looking at what is the innovation that is happening, and mostly this innovation is associated with startups, it's associated with some research that's coming out of the research labs or the academia and all that. But when we look at innovation ecosystem at T-Hub, we actually look at also the demand side. Okay, there's a huge amount of supply of great innovations, but are they actually finding their places in the market? What are the demand generators that are there in the ecosystem that will therefore consume these innovations that are coming out? So one, we have to start working on the mindset of the people saying, not everything that you now innovate has to come from within the organization. And I'm sure Ravikumar will talk about how they are looking at it at Baxter. So like that in Optum and so on and so forth, there are lots of things that are happening, and most of the things that have come out for the last several decades have been always from the inside of the company, or even within the government sector as well. So when we are looking at doing something in India especially, where not only do you need quick innovations and innovations that have reach, that have the capabilities of getting to a place with the smallest cost structures, you really have to solve it in a very, very different way. And that's where we find that the startups are the most nimblest, the most agile, the most aggressive, and maybe the most needy, that have to survive and therefore have to pluck the innovation that is out there and take it to a market that is ready to consume that innovation. And that's why we spend a lot of time doing that. I am not a practitioner of the health tech myself, but I will try and provide you more of a perspective as to what are the kinds of trends that are emerging in the startup world, what's going on there, what are the kinds of problems the startups have begun to solve, what are the problems that are there lying in front of them to do over the next several years, and where does where do we see the Indian health tech market going in terms of size and in terms of the kinds of complexities that they are taking on. So that's where I will spend my time giving you my perspectives.
Thanks
Thanks.
so much. Thanks, Ravi. I think absolutely. I think I'll request you to expand on it more, but I think demand side is crucial in terms of making sure that innovations which are shining in the making actually become useful and implementable on the ground, and that's a crucial thing. So, and I would like to possibly request you later on go a bit details, because while it is there, how does one actually go into that and ensures that those innovations actually go through such cycles and validate their hypothesis again and again? So I'll request you that. But coming to Ravi, I think how Baxter, I think you mentioned in your bio and otherwise also you have a journey from GE and then now at Baxter. How do you see Baxter as a corporate? Looks at nurturing innovations both, and now Baxter's operations are a year old, but I think the scale is already there. You mentioned around 1,500 people would be there within a year or so, and I had a good chance to meet Steve last year. He has been at CCAM a couple of times, so we had gone through a few cycles of thoughts as well. But coming back, where do you see Baxter, which is coming big time in India, in Bangalore? Where do you see Baxter as a corporate engaging with the innovation ecosystem and taking that further?
Thank you. So I'll speak about Baxter for sure. I'll also pick on my experiences from my doctorate days and from my GE days.
Yes.
Because it's sort of the second time I'm setting up an R&D facility. About 20 years ago, we had done the same thing for GE. And what I want to do is compare and contrast how the ecosystem has really matured and is on a frenetic pace of growth here, right? In the companies that I work for, we always think about innovation through the DARPA, what they call the TRL model, the technology readiness level models, right? But before you get into the TRL 1 through 10, there is also there is a needs setup at a grand scale that needs to happen, which is where the governments and the universities play a big part. And through the last 20 years, I see a tremendous growth in this space. The government of India, I mean, they switched from thinking about preventing communicable diseases and the focus on things like that to now Ayushman Bharat, having an ecosystem where we are thinking through regulations that drive quality, affordability, and access, while not being preventive to sort of growth, right? Ayushman Bharat is a great example. Recently, they talked about getting dialysis into patients' homes for the BPL. Regulations around how we can think through both the pharma segment as well as the device segment. So the government is setting the right vision on the grand challenges that the country needs to solve. The institutions, which is to innovate, you need people who are good at innovating and who have the fundamental basic technical knowledge to innovate. And I see the university ecosystem in India really, really mushrooming into going from developing great sort of technologists and scientists to great problem solvers. The incubation cells in IIT Bombay, IIT Madras, both of us from IIT Madras, so I will speak about IIT Madras 10 times. Fantastic place. The research park that they have set up, ridiculously good. Ashok Junju, there was an article in Economic Times about, we used to call him June July Wala, Jun Wala. The vision about bringing in an ecosystem, having the talent pool that is now thinking practical solutions, right? So that ecosystem is being built. And it's not just the IITs. Actually, Ramaya College in Bangalore is setting up a similar research park in that. So this is happening at multiple scales and multiple levels of academic excellence or talent or even regional distribution, right? And so with that being set up, now let's think about the early TRL, which is where typically national labs, universities and sort of incubators play a big part. The growth in India has been phenomenal. I mean, your CCamp is a great example of, for you to, India still hasn't unfortunately developed an NCE in it. So it's one of these things that will happen very, very soon. Very soon. For that to happen, you need really, really fundamental building blocks to be unraveled. I mean, you need to understand the structure and interactions of proteins and molecules. And this is where, I spent about 20 years in the US studying, working, then in India. There you could drive to national labs which had synchrotrons and you had 900 megahertz cryo NMRs and cryo TEMs in there. And you could not find that ecosystem 20 years ago in India. Bangalore, GE was the first facility that had bought a field emission microscope in the country, not a national lab, 20 years ago. Now, fast forward to now, I think you recently bought a cryo bio TM. Is it 30 crore or 30 million? I might be off. 30 million, I think, was the 30 crores? It was 30 crores, okay. Right? Every center, every facility is now coming up with remarkably good cutting edge analytical bioinformatics, genomics related instrumentation that is fundamental to having breakthroughs. So that discovery phase is now alive and beautifully working well in the national labs. Universities, we already talked about. Government, the funding, the way the government is funding programs and national labs is fundamentally great. The middle level, which is where the technology is sort of, the physics is proven, now we are thinking through proof of concept and scale. That's where you should be talking about it, Ravi, more than, you guys should be talking about it more than I do. It's fantastic how that handshake between these centers and the innovators from the ecosystem, the incubators, and the startups, that's where the phase starts building out. And the ecosystem is fantastic now for medtech. Towards the late TRL levels is where typically established multinational large companies or Indian companies come in, because that's where you need the access to the distribution channels, the manufacturability, etc. The problem is already solved, and it is incremental funding that leads larger dividends there. The whole ecosystem is there. The challenges we see in that ecosystem is it is nascent, it is heavily IT focused. And we think through TRL, I think for med tech, when it comes to devices, instrumentation, imaging instrumentation, or pharma innovations, think through biologics or biosimilars or whatever you want to think through there. The TRL, I think all elements, there is a player. There are at least 5 players you can think for each of these TRL levels. There are very few that truly can think through scaling up when it comes to the manufacturing readiness level. And this is a puzzle for me because in the automotive sector, in the aerospace sector, we have actually made dramatic leaps and bounds. And translating that to the medtech sector is, I think, a short putt, but it's a necessary putt towards us getting a totality of solutions. We'll be glad to talk more about it.
Thank you so much for that. I think, clearly, I think, if I just take your last thought very quickly, I think while a lot is being done in terms of, igniting young ideas and taking it forward, what we need is a kind of a much more robust, after the kindergarten, much more robust high schools. It's very important. Otherwise, what will happen, we'll have phenomenally exciting kindergarten graduates, and they would not have a system to be actually go through a very good high school system, and then you will lose them. And that is actually a gap in the system that has to be, it includes what you would call it as infrastructure, manufacturing support thing. It also includes support in terms of investment for the risky ideas, right? We do not have the risk capital much for now. And that is important. And that actually gives me a glimpse of the next speaker. Anup, I think I just heard you, but I think if I just come back, I think very, very important from your perspective, who looks at healthcare delivery. You have had experience in UK, significant experience in UK. Now you're at Manipal and drive their several programs, including, of course, your expertise in geriatrics. Geriatrics, broadly, if I may say so, is actually has a significant value in terms of making sure that our healthy aging, as they call it, is brought in. And we have actually a small center that we have built now at CCAM for Geriatrics Innovation Center, which we believe is a key because of our aging population. India will be a hotspot for many things, including aged population. But coming back, where do you see that opportunity in terms of using tech, not only geriatrics, but from your clinical background? If you can just brought this in. Thank you.
Thanks, Taslim. That's a very generous introduction. Thank you for the panel as well. And I would begin by saying that healthcare would be the holy grail for technology. And I think this is the final frontier where technology really needs to make a difference. And on the ground, we see about, I would say that there are about 3 or 4 stumbling blocks that we have. Number one is regulatory. And in that sense, the reason why I say regulatory hurdles is because you can have a Facebook giving out all its data to Cambridge Analytica and then improve the outcomes of elections, and Putin can make sure that Trump is elected in US. But that doesn't tend to happen in medicine. Data confidentiality is very, very supreme. And as a doctor, I was just saying at the roundtable that I still cannot prescribe online. I could lose my license if I do that. So unless the regulatory framework is cleared, I think healthcare technology will find it very, very difficult to penetrate into healthcare per se. Number two, it is also about the fact that where the focus of healthcare is. As of now, if you see the entire, broadly speaking, healthcare would be preventive, curative, and palliative. And now the entire focus is on curative. And unless we move to preventive healthcare, and that's where the technology is going to make a big difference. And until then, the uptake of technology is going to be very, very difficult. And the reason I say that is because if you look at what patients want, they want to stay healthy. And then if you look at from the provider perspective, you need more patients coming into the hospital. So there is a dichotomy there. And as with something like transport, where you have the biggest transport provider not owning any cars, I foresee a situation where the biggest healthcare provider will not have any beds. So that's exactly how it's panning out. In the morning session, we talked about Google and Fitbit. The first point of contact for, I would challenge this, saying that 99% of you, if you have a healthcare issue, the first person you'll contact is Google and not a doctor. So that per se becomes one of the biggest healthcare providers. How authentic it is, that's something which is questionable. But eventually, we see that the biggest healthcare provider may not be the person who has the biggest number of beds. The third impediment that we see in terms of this ecosystem growing is from the company's perspective. In every month, we have about 10 to 15 companies pitching to us, saying that, hey, doc, look, I've got this wonderful solution. Can you find a problem where you can fit it in? It doesn't work. So it has to be the other way around, where people work with us and then ensure that this ecosystem is nurtured. And the final stumbling block, as I said, is this person sitting over here, the doctors. The last thing we want when you have a patient sitting here is a brand new EMR, which requires me looking at the computer and putting in all that data rather than actually seeing a patient. So I think unless we address these 4 fundamental stumbling blocks, regulatory, the focus on preventive healthcare, the doctors per se, and the startups or the companies, I think once we do that, it would be a very good ecosystem for us to take health tech forward.
Thank you so much, Anup, for that. I think 2 aspects very quickly, but I think, in terms of adoption, I think regulatory clearance have to be, aligned with the way we build innovations. If you have regulatory clearances after you have innovations, it's not going to actually help anyone. And I think that requires an engagement at a different level where you actually foresee where your innovation interventions are going to come from and build policies for that than not. I'll give you a very quick example which just makes sense. A lot of people broadly, and this is not healthcare, but a lot of people say that we should use oceans more, right? There's a lot of oceans around us. There's no policy, how can we use ocean? There's no policy. Tomorrow government says that you cannot use ocean anymore for anything. You are done. Your entire business models are out of box. Right? It's just gone.
And in healthcare per se,
Yeah.
it's about licensure. If you do something which is not licensed, you could lose your license.
Exactly.
So regulatory is something which is really, really important in health.
Somewhere preempt, possibilities of innovations that would come, and it's very, very crucial. I think we have Dr. Satrana sitting with us, so I think we are just going to request a few things through him as well. But coming to Anjali now, who is involved in a larger hospital setting with focus on oncology per se, and has been also involved in building startups and supporting startups and so on. Where do you see from a large hospital setting the innovations that are going to come from? In the morning we discussed about adoption of innovation in healthcare settings and how are they going to pan out, because while hospitals which are possibly non-government run hospitals, how are they going to do it when there are issues from the regulatory aspects, when there are if I may say so, peers would accept or not, like as it is stumbling blocks, like if I may just use the word, I don't know who are going to do that. So how do you see that? Because you definitely want to be right time to make sure that you are also in the frontier of tech using your delivery of healthcare. How do you see that happening?
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you and pleasure to be here. I'll start off with more of a little bit basic thing that I've seen. So I've been here living in India now 10 years. And I think when I first came, it was from the US, it was an eye-opening experience of how healthcare is run and how different it is from the US. Good, bad, ugly, all those things. And I think there's a lot of good in that. And I think over the years, I've been able to see some amazing things here. And I think we don't actually, as India, brand it. I'll just give an example. A few years ago, I went to see the healthcare environment and the innovation environment in Switzerland, and everything is Swiss-made, right? We all know Swiss. We think chocolate, we think knives, we think all these things. But what do we think of when we think India? We think doctors, right? We think engineers. We do all this. But it is actually data-backed. A recent study published in the US shows that Indian doctors treating patients have better outcomes. And I can say at HealthCG, we have a publication coming out next week where it shows our outcomes in breast cancer are better than the outcomes that are published by the American Cancer Society. And the patient outcomes, perceived outcomes, is better than the NHS system. These are all independent bodies that come and measure and look at this. And I think when we look at healthcare innovation, a lot of fantastic, wonderful ideas that are out there. But how do we become collaborative in nature? And it kind of takes me back, and I'm telling kind of a different story of in the US, when you grow up, you always have to play in a sport. It's mandatory. You don't have a choice. You have to play American football if you're a guy, or if you want to go into getting brain injuries, or you have to play football, soccer, or you play baseball, whatever it is. And the whole concept is not the actual sport, but the fact that you have to play as a team. And one of the biggest things I've seen in looking at healthcare, I can see within HealthCG, we started as a group of doctors that started, and that's the reason that even today we're a Doctors Run initiative. When we partner with doctors, and that's really why it's been successful. We partner with our nurses, we partner with the entire environment. Now and we've heard, I think, from many speakers on when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about healthcare, we're saying we're doing so many amazing things, but really the basis is, I think, forums like this and other things, really, we talk about a lot of things, but how do we get to the execution and the action phase of being collaborative? To give a little example, a couple years ago when I started looking at startups and said, okay, here we have all these amazing startups coming in. They have great ideas. Clinical panels have to look at them, really see if there's a value. I was thinking, how do we get all of us to do it together and pick those startups that are the best for healthcare? And I'll just pick, wearable devices, right? You see so many of them. I can monitor your heart rate, I can monitor this. There's 10 people in the same field. How do you pick which is the best? Obviously the clinicians, the hospital can pick which is the best, but we should be doing it together. And I floated this idea around with a couple other big chains, said how do we work together? And immediately it was stone face, right? The idea of, survival of the fittest, Darwinism is very big in India. We're 1.5, 3 billion people. We have to be survival of the best. But how do we take that back a notch and say, if we're all collaborating, we're all going to get bigger piece of the pie, or the most famous sweet here, I don't know, Mysore pak, the biggest piece of that. How do we get that? And I think that's the key when we're looking at startups. And it's also within the tech innovation. I'll give one example. We have a healthcare startup from Singapore that looks at wound care and can analyze the wound and look 7 layers down into the wound and say, this is how you should treat it. We also have a stem cell clinic that looks at treating these wounds. When you put them together and say, hey, why don't you collaborate, work together, automatic face goes like this. So we really have to nurture and foster that, and it really has to come down to the education systems, but also within our own companies. How do we encourage, how do we foster being together? And I think that's where the key is to make India the best in healthcare innovation. And I think we definitely have the talent. The talent is all there, but the branding, the communication, that aspect has to be really, really thought out, strategized, and really put into action. I think there's amazing things that are happening as far as data, as far as getting together on that, trying to do it. But really, how do we take it to the next level is when we start talking about that teamwork, about that collaboration, and make it action. And I think that's the real point that I see underlining for all the things that each panelist has spoken about. And I'm personally very passionate about that because I've seen the results when it comes to patient care. Looking after quality for our entire network. When we are collaborative, you automatically see a decline in death rates or a decline in surgical site infections or medication errors, all of which happens in hospitals. But how do you do it is analyzing those data, working as a team to solve it, and not really saying, okay, I can do this. It never works with an I in hospitals. It only works with a we to help the patient. I think that's something that healthcare tech has to keep in mind in how we're going to move forward in working together.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anjali. I think I cannot agree more, because when I think the era of health tech has to happen, it has to happen with the contributions from all, because a lot of them possibly will have to come on board to make sure that's a success rather than stay back. And I think I completely agree with it. I think we are a few minutes down, and before we actually, we are very keen to have engagement with audience. So I'll try to have a next round very, very quick and have direct questions and hopefully direct answer as well. I'll start with Anup, just to break the monotonous the series from here. You spoke about preventive care, and I think I see in terms of preventing, screening is a very important aspect. And more so not only in the urban setting, but in rural setting as well, where the awareness is low. A quick example that from our side, we have seen a real phenomenal screening ability using digital pathology for cervical cancer screening for pap smear, where you actually, and I'm going very fast, but you can actually convert something around 60% specificity, which is currently available using primary healthcare center and so on. You're actually using a simple phone-based picture, which goes on the cloud, and have a first-level screening, 94% specificity, right? You're not using any infrastructure, not really a practitioner on the ground to be able to do that. So where do you see the real opportunity? But let's have 3 areas where you think the preventive is one good start for health tech.
I think I would probably want to go a step backward in terms of the preventive healthcare. We have phenomenal technologies in terms of preventive. Say we are doing a trial on something called as the iBreast, which is not similar to mammogram, but something which is used for cancer prevention, breast cancer prevention, and it's almost on par with the gold standard. So that's one. Of course, you have remote monitoring as well, which can pick up cardiac abnormalities earlier. But then the issue is about when you're focusing on wellness and prevention, especially in an Indian setting, it has to be an incentivized wellness. Otherwise, the question is, why should I do this? We as a people are that with that mindset that, I don't know whether you know about that Maruti ad when you look at the rocket, kitna deti hai. So it's something similar to that. What's in it for me? Why should I get this done? So it doesn't hit you until you go into the hospital and then you pay for the curative. So I personally feel that, yes, there are a lot of technologies, but then until this question of incentivized wellness is addressed, who's going to be the payer for this? So do you have outpatient insurance or do you have universal health coverage? It's only then that preventive wellness is going to take off. So technologies are many, but as I said, we need that ecosystem. You need to define who the payer is, and it's only then that it is going to take off.
Absolutely. I think spot on in terms of, when you have technology for dissemination and adoption, you need incentives and the system which we can do that. I think spot on, absolutely. I'll go to Anjali. Anjali, you spoke about the larger picture and larger action. From a setting that you say, what would be your ideal way that we can nurture those innovations that can go forward? Would you have a sketch that you can draw for us?
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about, I'll just take medical in the curative segment. I'll take medical devices, right? Just take it. There's a lot of phenomenal things in diagnostics that is available. Now, every person cannot know what it all is, right? Maybe a computer can, but we cannot know what it is. A simple innovation that I think is very collaborative would be that if every patient that has, if we can get a little bit of a data on the patient to know what are they facing right now at the hospital, and maybe have something that's collaborative where you have a team of doctors and researchers that sit and kind of see this device would be probably the best for this patient, and immediately goes to the doctor and says, a report goes to them saying, why don't you consider using these things? And then the hospital or the providers can take it on rent basis and try it, because hospitals cannot just buy lots of equipment. If you go to many hospitals across, whether it's government, private, you oftentimes see unused equipments because one doctor would have come and said, we need to use this, but then the business plan or the plan to execute it gets missed. So this is something where I think is a true innovation, where companies have access, and hospitals and doctors have access to these, but they don't have to commit until they see, yes, this is going to use. And it's a PPP model that can be worked. And I'd just like to add one point in preventive. I think one aspect that we can use, and I'm learning about it now to leverage, is how can we work with prevention by using what taxpayers, what we're all paying already. For example, we've been trying to say the cigarette tax that's there, how can that be used in prevention in rural areas? And the funding is going somewhere else, but it needs to come to healthcare. It needs to come to prevention, where we can talk about 40% is estimated of deaths in India, in rural areas, is related to tobacco use, whether it's heart attacks, cancer, any of these things. How do we work on reducing that? And that itself will make it so we can spend more on other things. So I think that's a key aspect in prevention.
I think that clearly, as a larger picture, definitely makes sense. Coming to Ravikumar, if I may, I think you spoke about the scaling up and manufacturing. That reminds me of a model that is being largely present in Europe, where they are building what you would call it as test beds. But it is being done in collaborations with corporates, government, and other agencies. So like AstraZeneca has come and built test beds along with that.
For continuous manufacturing.
GE itself, Testa, if you do know, right? Testa has a phenomenal, where larger corporates come and say, I have an understanding of the scaling up. I know what is required, and I may actually come in here, which can be a mid-play for the startups and innovations to come forward. Do you think there is something of that could be possible in India? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but
I hope so. I believe so. I hope so. And there are other industries where this model has partially worked. I think the defense industry, the aerospace industry, is one where there is an ecosystem built between government, large companies, and the military on innovations that are practical and that need to go out into the battlefield. Let me not talk about peace versus war, but the challenge in healthcare is significantly more impactful to the common person, right? And Ayushman Bharat, the digital footprint, the digital blueprint. Sorry. Thank you. If we could get the collaboration between the companies which are closest to the patient and have a path to market and a path to monetization and the cleanest definition of problems, if you will. I mean, they are living with problems every day, and they, the problem statement or the needs finding can come from there. Government setting up regulations that drives quality, affordability, and accessibility without being onerous on cost. And the startups, the incubator cells, the university and the national labs, coming together to be that middle person, right? The way a VC or the way an incubation cell looks at the legs that an idea has is remarkably different from that of a very mature industrial partner. There has to be a level of certainty and surety on monetization and return on investment, and there are 7 financial models that we look at before we even shake your hand. VCs go half gut, half financial model, right? And incubation cells, the national labs, governments. Collaboration among these on a grand vision that a government sets or a philanthropic organization sets, that can then be a rallying cry for multiple, like we have done with ISRO, I think is a great example of how we have taken a vision to right through to manufacturing, and we are one of the, I think, the 2 largest countries in the world in sort of commercial satellite launching, if you will, right? ISRO is a government organization. They have done it. Yeah. Why can't we do that for medtech? I'm hopeful. I believe the answer is yes. It'll happen. It has to happen.
Absolutely. An important vision and something that we need to reiterate in many platforms to make sure that people actually, come on this vision and build on it. Ravi, I think the important thing is that innovations are built, but how do you make sure the innovations have demand for it? And because that is something, unfortunately, in medtech even, not if you take out the health tech, medtech we are seeing a lot. It may be possibly we are looking at, we always had the medtech bubble from the US. My worry is that are we actually even have that? So if we were to stop that in health tech, what we need to do?
I think, the startup phenomenon in India truly started around 2006 to almost the 2015, almost 9 years. You saw that a lot of people just got energized by their own ideas and their own engineering capabilities or understanding of technology, and they started building certain things. They didn't necessarily understand the demand side of things. This is what Dr. Anup was talking about, and it's like I have a solution, find me the problem. Obviously that's very tough to do, but slowly along that time, around 2013 onwards, I think a lot of the corporates and various other organizations started opening up to the possibility of exposing some of the challenges that they were facing, and therefore sort of gave the context for solving those problems for them using technology. So, as Ravikumar just pointed out, while that was providing the context, I think most of the startups that emerged kind of skimmed off the top, as in the easier problems to solve. They have not taken on the real huge problems. So, for example, in 2018, we have close to about 5,000 startups in the health tech space. I would suspect more than 60-65% of them are just doing some things that are closer to the individual, something in the personal health management, something in fitness and wellness, telemedicine. Interestingly, Practo is put into telemedicine category. So these are the kinds of things that basically using IT to kind of organize information, organize data, and so on and so forth. It's not really, going deep into solving, certain problems. If you see really stuff in bioinformatics, health IT, and genomics, and where you really are beginning to unleash, the technology, IT capabilities. If you hear Vinod Khosla saying, the kind of things that data processing and IT brings to to medicine, is much higher than some of the fundamental biological sciences can do together, right? So we really have just begun that journey with about 5% of that, being unlocked at this point in time. So I think we haven't even scratched the surface of what's the possibilities, and that too, taking the more indigenous kind of issues that India faces, and trying to take healthcare to the last mile. So I think you'll begin to see that probably another 3 to 5 years from now. I don't know if that answers the question.
Partially does. I have already got my clue.
All right. Thank you.
And if I may add to that, there are many structured approaches towards understanding and quantifying needs. Uh, uh, and pick your style here, right? I mean, there is Six Sigma, there is theory of inventive problem solving, there is lean processes, there is Stanford Biodesign. All of these emphasize on ensuring that you understand what the critical needs are or what the need statement is. And for some reason, the startups or the inventive ecosystem goes into I have a tech, now give me a problem. If we can flip it around, and that's, I think, where the VCs and the incubators can play a critical part. It'll be a game changer.
No, absolutely, I think, and just to add what Ravi was saying to that engagement with corporates which have their own internal verified grant challenges, and see how they can connect and align that, which is going to be absolutely crucial. Well, I have been possibly my neck is hurting. I've been leftist for a while. So let me be the centrist, not necessarily moving to the right, but I think we are very keen to have a couple of questions from audience, if there are any, so that we can start at least wrapping this up before the questions. Questions for the panel? I think it has been fantastic inputs, according to me. Questions? Yeah, please.
I was quite impressed when Dr. Amarnath spoke about prevention. And one thing is about disease-specific prevention and cancer and so on. But what about the overall prevention of lifestyle diseases, say via education, through nutrition and so on, and along with that, diagnostics? For example, for India, I believe that a very much cheaper methods of diagnostics, whether it is blood diagnostics or other health parameters, will go a long way in making prevention accessible to the poor. So from that angle, I had some questions. A specific question being non-contact methods of diagnostics. For example, whether it's microfluids or what Theranos was trying to do and it failed because of fraud and so on. Are there any such initiatives happening in India? Because that's where what we need the most in our country.
No, we have. I think coordinator will anyone who wants to take this.
So I think that's a very good question, and at the risk of sounding repetitive at various fora, this is, I think Raghu might know this, this is a common challenge which I put across at the end of this Q&A to any fora, and I've been doing this for the last 2 years, but even up until now, I don't have an answer to that. 30% of the audience here are diabetic. Whether you know or you don't know, I can challenge you that. 30% of you are diabetic. The question is, and the reason why I'm talking about, as you rightly said, lifestyle-related diseases is because 65% of mortality in India happens because of cardiac, diabetes, and hypertension. So we need to prevent that. And the biggest impediment as doctors that we see is, are you going to monitor your sugars, is because of the needle phobia. You're not going to do that. So the question which I had put forth earlier on was, India is a very innovative nation, and then NASSCOM, and this is the most appropriate forum for us to put in this challenge. Can you give us a truly non-invasive blood sugar monitor? You just put it on your finger and it should tell me your sugar levels. That, to a large extent, would be a single largest differentiator in terms of preventing diseases and mortality in India. Up until now, I don't have the answer. And I don't want a Theranos in India. But at least I want a truly non-invasive blood sugar monitor. Open challenge. Anybody, I'm happy to look into that.
Thank you so much, Anup. Yeah, there is a question there. Okay, would you want to just shout out?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
My question is, who has the economic incentive to work towards public health initiatives? startups, corporate hospitals, tech labs, why would they have an incentive to work on the poor man's problems? Where would the incentive come from?
No, the incentivized wellness is what we were just discussing. And I think one of the major developments that has happened over the last few months and in the last couple of years is the focus on universal health coverage. So Ayushman Bharat has two components. One is the curative component, but one thing which has not been publicized is the establishment of about 50, 60,000 wellness centers. So I think it is very good of the government to focus on universal health coverage. And this focus on wellness centers, if implemented in the right way on the ground, will go a large way in addressing this, the question of incentivize. So I think it is very much up to the government to ensure universal health coverage is done, and the incentivization needs to come from them. NHS is not a good model. 40% of my earnings went as tax. No, let's cut some slack and give credit where it's due. Let's ensure that, it hasn't been tried before. Of course, there'll be stumbling blocks. But then if, as I said, the operative word is if implemented in the right way, the wellness centers, the 50, 60,000 wellness centers across India would make a sea change in terms of healthcare outcomes.
Absolutely. And just if I may add, I think such a move has been a necessary thing for India to do because of obvious things, and such move and mission can actually drive a lot of people towards it. So I think there is a larger good that is there for society to do, and I think globally people are looking for tech for a screening, for preventive and so on, because healthcare burdens are crazy across, while you're served or not. So I think there are initiatives, but these are opinions we have shared back with you, so sorry about that. I think, can we take this last question? Since he has a mic.
Thank you. The question is, do you see potential for partnering with non-traditional or alternate medicine, which is far cheaper and different in its delivery?
I think we'll have quick two points.
So very quickly, I think for a patient that comes here, one way is not the only way that they're going to consider. And I think, some of the things we've been able to see, and I'll just very quickly say it at CG, we've seen a huge impact on yoga or Ayurveda in the outcome of the patient when it is tied with Western medicine norms. So, and that is what personalized care is going for. And we see a huge difference with patients when we do yoga therapy, other therapies, along with cancer patients. And the outcomes are quite beneficial, whether it's stress, whether it's the actual clinical outcome that comes in. And we've done a lot of publications on that. So there is definitely a way, I think, moving forward with technology and other things, you'll see more of that coming.
Thank you.
I believe the opportunity exists. The challenge that you have to overcome is if you also want to monetize using that model, regulatory challenges need to be overcome. And all regulatory agencies across the globe, India included, puts the onus on the inventor or the supplier to prove efficacy and effectiveness and the downside, right? And that hurdle of regulatory approval requires a whole bunch of scientific information where I see that being the bottleneck that you need to overcome for you to be able to do that marriage.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think we'll have to take your questions offline. But thank you so much, co-panelists. Thank you so much for joining. I think it was a fantastic session. If I may summarize in a few things, I think we are phenomenally optimistic about the potential of health tech addressing phenomenal or great problems that we have in terms of healthcare delivery. What it requires is nurturing. We have to identify the areas which needs to be addressed. We spoke about demands. We spoke about the scale-up issues. We talk about the regulatory, and we spoke about the larger perspectives. And I think those and many more need to be possibly addressed. And I'm glad that NASSCOM has been able to put such a platform together. So thank you so much, Raghu, for coordinating this. Looking forward to engaging more. Thank you so much.